There is a real room, in nearly every coroner's office, morgue, and police department in every city across the country. It is a room that is, for all intents and purposes, filled with ghosts. Not the kind that rattle chains or whisper in the dark corridors of a haunted house, but a far more tragic, more tangible, and more silent kind. These are the ghosts of the unnamed, the unidentified. Their files sit in beige, accordion-style folders, tucked away in cold, metal filing cabinets. Their worldly belongings, often meager and mundane, are sealed in sterile plastic evidence bags. Their faces, captured with a dispassionate clinical eye, are preserved in stark, black and white post-mortem photographs. They are the John and Jane Does, individuals who lived and breathed and walked in our world, who had families and favorite songs and secret fears, but who left this world without a name, their stories erased, their connections to history and to love irrevocably severed. For decades, the monumental and often heartbreaking task of giving these souls their names back was a lonely, analog, and frequently hopeless pursuit. It was the quiet, solitary work of a single, dedicated detective or medical examiner, pinning a forensic sketch to a corkboard already crowded with other lost faces. It was the painstaking, manual process of sifting through reams of paper, comparing dental records and fingerprints against national databases that were often incomplete and poorly integrated. It was a marathon of cold calls to other jurisdictions, inquiries that rarely led anywhere, leaving a trail of unanswered questions. It was a slow, quiet, and deeply frustrating vigil against the relentless erosion of time and memory. More often than not, the file would grow thicker not with leads but with dead ends. The box of personal effects would gather more dust on a forgotten shelf. And the ghost in the system would remain a ghost. But in the 21st century, a new and revolutionary kind of detective agency emerged. It has no central office, no official hierarchy, no government funding, and no formal training program. Its headquarters is a subreddit. Its detectives are anonymous strangers, scattered across every corner of the globe. They are university students in Australia, truck drivers crossing the American Midwest, stay-at-home parents in the UK, data analysts in India, and retirees in Florida. They are the Websleuths, and they have built a new kind of room for these ghosts, not a cold, silent archive, but a vibrant, collaborative, digital campfire. A place where the cold, forgotten details of a decades-old case can be shared, examined, and warmed by the bright, intense light of collective curiosity and a shared, profoundly human desire to solve the unsolvable. The Internet, a force we so often associate with anonymity, with chaos, with the amplification of the darkest aspects of human nature, has, in these remarkable instances, become its precise opposite. It has become a vast, decentralized, and astonishingly powerful engine for identification. A global nervous system capable of perceiving a connection, of spotting a familiar face in a crowd, of finding a name for a ghost, where all the traditional, established methods have failed, sometimes for decades. Today, we are going to tell the stories of two of these ghosts. Two young men who died alone, far from home, leaving behind perfectly constructed mysteries that stumped law enforcement for years, even decades. They became legends not of folklore, but of the Internet age. Their cases became rallying cries for a new kind of citizen investigation, their faces becoming as familiar to a generation of online sleuths as those of their own friends. And through the tireless, obsessive, and deeply human efforts of thousands of strangers, connected only by screens and a shared sense of purpose, they were finally given back the one fundamental thing that had been taken from them: their names. This is the story of the young man the Internet affectionately and accurately called Grateful Doe, and the quiet, enigmatic, and profoundly sad figure known to the world only as Lyle Stevick. Their long, lonely journeys through the darkness of anonymity, and their final, crowdsourced return to the light, reveal the astonishing power of a connected world to heal some of our oldest and most human wounds. Our first story begins on a hot, humid, and ultimately tragic afternoon. The date is June 26, 1995. The place is a stretch of U.S. Route 58 in the rural landscape of Greensville County, Virginia. A Volkswagen Vanagon, that iconic, boxy camper van that for a generation symbolized freedom and life on the open road, is traveling eastbound. Inside are two young men. The driver is Michael Hager, age 21. His passenger is another young man, with long, reddish-blonde hair tied back in a ponytail, probably around the same age. The van is filled with the casual, lived-in clutter of a life spent on the road, the kind of life lived by young people following a singular, all-consuming passion. And their passion was music. Specifically, the sprawling, improvisational, and culturally significant music of the Grateful Dead. The band, in the summer of 1995, was on its final tour with its iconic, beloved, and ailing frontman, Jerry Garcia. Just 2 days earlier, on June 24th and 25th, the Grateful Dead had played two massive, sold-out shows at Robert F. Kennedy Memorial Stadium in Washington, D.C. It is almost certain that the two young men in the van were there, just two faces in the vast, swirling, tie-dyed crowd. They were part of the traveling, nomadic city of Deadheads, the legion of devoted fans who followed the band from coast to coast, creating a unique and self-sufficient counterculture in stadium parking lots across America. They were likely heading to the next stop on the tour, at the Deer Creek Music Center in Indiana, or perhaps just beginning the long drive home, the sound of the concert still ringing in their ears, the experience still fresh in their minds. But they would never make it to Deer Creek. They would never make it home. In a sudden, violent, and chaotic instant, Michael Hager lost control of the van. The vehicle ran off the road, careened into an embankment, and began to roll over multiple times, shedding parts and belongings as it tumbled through the ditch. The crash was catastrophic. Both young men, likely not wearing seatbelts, were ejected from the vehicle with tremendous force. When paramedics and state troopers arrived at the scene, the mangled wreckage of the van told a story of terrible violence. Both young men were pronounced dead at the scene. The identification of the driver, Michael Hager, was tragically straightforward. His wallet and ID were found, and his family was soon notified of the devastating news. But his passenger was a complete and utter enigma. He had no wallet, no driver's license, no identification of any kind on his person. In the wreckage of the van, scattered among the debris, investigators found a few, meager, and ultimately frustrating clues. They found 2 ticket stubs for the Grateful Dead concerts at RFK Stadium, confirming their recent whereabouts. They found a disposable Bic lighter with the image of a cartoon bear on it. And they found a small, handwritten note, torn from a piece of paper. On one side, it read, "To Jason, sorry we had to go. See you around. Call me," followed by a phone number with a Maryland area code. On the other side, it read, "Caroline T. and Caroline O. Bye-bye." The police had a potential first name, Jason, and they had a phone number. This should have been the breakthrough that solved the case within hours. But when they called the number, it led only to more confusion. The person who answered the phone had no idea who Jason was and had no knowledge of 2 young women named Caroline. It was a wrong number or a fake number or perhaps just a hastily scribbled, incorrect digit. It was another dead end. So the young man with the long hair became a John Doe. He was white, estimated to be between 15 and 21 years old, with long, wavy, reddish-blonde hair, brown eyes, and a distinctive homemade-looking star tattoo on his left arm. His left ear was pierced. At the time of his death, he was wearing a red, blue, and yellow tie-dyed t-shirt, a pair of faded glory jeans, and white Fila sneakers. The most distinctive clues were the ticket stubs and the iconic t-shirt. He was, without a doubt, a deadhead. And so, in the official parlance of law enforcement and the burgeoning online communities dedicated to the unidentified, he was given a name, a poignant placeholder that would stick with him for the next 20 years. He became Grateful Doe. The initial investigation went nowhere. A forensic artist was brought in to create a post-mortem sketch of his face, a haunting, black and white rendering of a young man with a peaceful, almost sleeping expression. The sketch was distributed to law enforcement agencies up and down the East Coast and printed in newspapers. No one came forward. No family filed a missing persons report that seemed to match his specific description. The two Carolines from the note were never identified. The trail, which had seemed so promising for a moment, went cold almost immediately. For 2 decades, Grateful Doe remained a ghost in the system. His was just one of tens of thousands of cold cases involving unidentified persons in the United States, a silent testament to a life that had slipped through the cracks. His file sat in a cabinet in the Virginia State Police headquarters. His story was known only to the handful of dedicated officers who had worked the case over the years and to the grieving Hager family, who mourned not only their own son, but the nameless boy who had died alongside him. It seemed his true identity was lost forever, a casualty of a forgotten highway accident and a free-spirited life lived deliberately off the grid. But then the world changed. The Internet, which in 1995 was still a niche enthusiasm for academics and hobbyists, grew into the central, undeniable nervous system of global society. And on its forums, its message boards, and eventually its social media platforms, a new kind of community was born. People who were fascinated by mysteries, by cold cases, by the poignant stories of the lost and the unnamed, began to congregate. They created websites like the Doe Network and forums like Websleuths. They began the painstaking volunteer work of digitizing old, forgotten case files, sharing forensic sketches, and applying the incredible power of crowdsourced thinking and collective memory to mysteries that had stumped police departments for years. In the late 2000s and early 2010s, the case of Grateful Doe was rediscovered by this new generation of digital detectives. His story was a perfect fit for the platform. It was tragic. It was mysterious. And crucially, it had a set of unique, culturally specific clues, the powerful Grateful Dead connection. This wasn't just any John Doe. He belonged to a specific, passionate, and incredibly well-documented community. The Websleuths held a powerful central belief. If they could just get his face and his story in front of enough deadheads from that era, someone somewhere would recognize him. A Facebook page was created, Grateful Doe Unidentified Male. The original case file, the post-mortem sketch, the photos of the ticket stubs, and the note were all uploaded. The story was posted and reposted on the massive subreddit r/Unresolved Mysteries, where it became one of the forum's most famous and frequently discussed cases. And the digital manhunt began in earnest. The work done by these volunteers was slow, obsessive, meticulous, and deeply compassionate. Users with knowledge of the Grateful Dead scene analyzed the ticket stubs. They could see the dates, the venue, the seat numbers. This confirmed his presence at the RFK shows. It allowed them to trace his last known movements with certainty. They researched the Grateful Dead's summer tour of 1995, trying to map out potential routes he and Michael Hager might have been taking. They debated whether they were heading to the next show in Indiana, or perhaps taking a detour to visit friends or family. They obsessively analyzed the handwritten note. They used new online tools to try and trace the phone number again, hoping to find a new lead. They created threads dedicated to trying to find the two Carolines. Were they other deadheads they had met on the road? Were they old friends from back home? The note was a tantalizing, heartbreaking glimpse into a social life, a life with connections and friends, that had somehow been completely and totally severed by his death. And most importantly, they looked at his face. The forensic sketch was shared thousands upon thousands of times on Grateful Dead fan pages, on forums dedicated to tour life, in subcultures dedicated to the nomadic, rainbow-gathering lifestyle. The Websleuths began the monumental and often soul-crushing task of manually comparing the sketch of Grateful Dead to the thousands of existing missing persons cases listed in national databases like Nameless, the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. This process was a grueling, emotional cycle of hope and disappointment. A user would spend hours scrolling through photos of missing young men and find one who looked similar, who went missing around the right time. A buzz of excitement would ripple through the community. The information would be carefully compiled and passed on to the Virginia State Police. And then, weeks or sometimes months later, the official news would come back. A comparison of dental records or a preliminary DNA test had definitively ruled out the match. This happened time and time again, year after year. But the community never gave up. They were driven by a profound sense of duty to this nameless young man. They felt they knew him. They knew the music he loved. They understood the world he came from. He was one of their own. They refused to let him be forgotten. And then, in early 2015, after years of this tireless, thankless digital work, a single, crucial spark finally ignited a fire. A user on Reddit made a new, detailed post about the Grateful Dead case. Another user, a man from South Carolina, happened to see that post. He looked at the familiar forensic sketch, and he felt a powerful jolt of recognition. The face was hauntingly familiar. He remembered a young man he had known years ago, when he lived in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. This young man had been a passionate deadhead. He had a similar look, a similar build, and he had disappeared, simply vanished from their circle of friends, sometime around 1995. The young man's name was Jason. The Reddit user who remembered him didn't know his last name, but he knew other people from that time who might. This was the first fragile thread. The lead was passed on to other online communities, including the dedicated Grateful Dead Facebook page. A woman named Leah, who had also known Jason in Myrtle Beach back in the 90s, saw the post. She was sure it was him. She remembered his last name, Jason Callahan. She reached out to the administrators of the Facebook page, who then contacted law enforcement with this new, specific, and incredibly credible lead. The wheels of the official investigation, which had been stalled for 20 long years, began to turn again with renewed purpose. The Virginia State Police, armed with a full name and a last known location, were able to locate the family of Jason Callahan. They learned that Jason had, indeed, left his home in Myrtle Beach in 1995 at the age of 19. He had told his family he was heading out on the road to follow the Grateful Dead. His family had not heard from him since. In a heartbreaking twist, they revealed they had never officially filed a missing persons report because they were a family that had been estranged, and they had always held out a sliver of hope that their free-spirited son was simply out living his life on his own terms and would one day decide to return home. The final step was scientific confirmation. This could not be solved by memory alone. DNA samples were taken from Jason Callahan's mother and his half-brother. They were sent to a specialized lab to be compared with the DNA that had been carefully preserved from Grateful Dead's body 2 decades earlier. The online community, now thousands strong, held its collective breath. On December 9, 2015, 20 years, 5 months, and 13 days after the fatal crash, the Virginia Medical Examiner's Office made the official announcement. The DNA was a perfect match. Grateful Dead finally had a name. He was Jason Patrick Callahan. He was 19 years old when he died. The mystery was solved. The news rippled through the online communities that had worked on his case for so long with such passion. There was a sense of profound triumph, of relief, but it was deeply intertwined with a profound sense of melancholy. The ghost had been given a name, but the story was still and would always be a tragedy. A family finally had answers, but those answers were the confirmation of their worst fears. Jason Callahan was never coming home. The internet had done what 2 decades of traditional, underfunded, and overburdened police work could not. It had connected the dots across states, across years, across cultures and subcultures. A single Reddit post, seen by the right person at the right time, had unlocked a 20-year-old mystery. It was a powerful, moving testament to the potential of the digital campfire, a place where a cold case could be kept warm by the persistent, unwavering glow of a global community until the crucial piece of information, the key to the entire puzzle, finally emerged from the darkness. Jason Callahan was no longer a doe. He was a son, a brother, a friend. He was a young man who loved music, who loved to travel, and who was now, finally and fully, at rest. The story of Grateful Doe is a story of a public search, of a face in a crowd finally being recognized from a single sketch. Our second story is different. It is a darker, quieter, and more intentionally mysterious story. It is a story about a man who did not want to be found. A man who took meticulous, almost surgical steps to erase his own identity before taking his own life, leaving behind a mystery so perfectly constructed, so intentionally blank, that it became one of the most haunting and obsessed-over cases in the entire history of the Internet. This is the story of the man who chose his own final, fictional name, Lyle Stevick. Our story begins on a quiet, overcast Monday. The date is September 17th, 2001. It is just 6 days after the world-shattering events of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. The entire country is in a state of shock, grief, and heightened anxiety. But in the small, unassuming motel called the Lake Quinault Inn, in the remote town of Amanda Park, Washington, on the edge of the vast, temperate rainforest of the Olympic National Park, life continues at a slower pace. That afternoon, a young man walks into the lobby. He is in his early 20s, with dark hair, a light complexion, a slim build, and a quiet, polite demeanor. He asks the clerk for a room for the night. He signs the registration card with the name Lyle Stevick and provides a false home address in Meridian, Idaho. He pays for one night's lodging in cash with a $40 bill. The clerk gives him the key to room 5. He is seen by a few people over the next day or so. The motel clerk remembers him being polite. Another witness sees him walking back and forth along the highway near the motel, possibly to a nearby convenience store. He seems quiet, unremarkable, lost in his own thoughts, just another anonymous traveler passing through this remote and beautiful corner of the world. No one suspects that anything is wrong. 2 days later, on Wednesday, September 19th, the motel's cleaning staff noticed that the Do Not Disturb sign is still hanging on the door of room 5. When they finally enter the room to clean it, they find a scene of quiet, methodical, and heartbreaking tragedy. The young man who had checked in as Lyle Stevick had taken his own life. He had hanged himself in the closet of the small motel room. The room itself was clean, almost sterile. He had drawn the blinds, shutting out the outside world. On the nightstand, he had left behind a small pile of cash $160 and a note. The note did not contain a confession, an apology, or an explanation for his final, desperate act. It contained only 4 simple words, written neatly on a piece of paper torn from the motel's own notepad. For the room, he was, in his final moments, a considerate and responsible guest. Police and the Grays Harbor County coroner arrived at the scene and began the now familiar, grim process of trying to identify a John Doe. But it became immediately apparent that this case was different. This was not a case of a man who had tragically lost his identity through accident or misfortune. It was a case of a man who had intentionally, methodically, and successfully discarded it. He had no wallet, no keys, no cell phone, no personal belongings of any kind. other than the clothes on his back and the toothbrush and toothpaste he had likely purchased from the nearby store. He had, it seemed, walked into that motel room with the sole focused purpose of becoming a ghost. The first, and for a long time only, real clue was the name itself. Lyle Stevick. It was unusual, distinctive. Investigators quickly determined that there was no real person by that name associated with the fake address he had provided. It was an alias, and a very specific, very literary one at that. Researchers eventually discovered that Lyle Stevick is a minor character in the 1987 novel You Must Remember This by the acclaimed and prolific American author Joyce Carol Oates. In the novel, the character Lyle Stevick also contemplates and attempts suicide. This was a significant and chilling clue. The John Doe of Amanda Park was not just some random drifter. He was well-read, he was intelligent, he was deliberate. He had chosen his own final, false identity from a work of serious literary fiction. It was a poetic, self-conscious act of self-erasure. An autopsy was performed. He was determined to be a white male, likely between 20 and 30 years old, though some estimates put him as high as 35. He had an old, faded appendectomy scar. His dental work was in good condition, suggesting he had received regular care. There was nothing to suggest a life of poverty or long-term neglect. A forensic sketch was created, a sensitive, detailed drawing of a young man with kind, sad eyes and a hint of a gentle smile. The sketch, along with the sparse details of the case, was distributed to law enforcement agencies across the country. And then, as with Grateful Doe, the case went cold. Utterly and completely cold. No one came forward to claim him. No missing persons reports seemed to be a match. The man who called himself Lyle Stevick remained a name without a person, a perfectly constructed puzzle without a single solution. But his story, like that of Grateful Doe, found a powerful and enduring second life on the internet. His case became one of the most frequently discussed, deeply researched, and emotionally obsessed over mysteries on our /unresolved mysteries and the Websleuths forums. There was something about the quiet dignity, the intellectual nature of his alias, and the profound, lonely sadness of his final act that resonated deeply with the online community. He wasn't just another John Doe. He became a cause, a project, a communal responsibility. The community felt a collective need to give this lonely soul his name back, to undo his final act of self-erasure. He was, in a very real sense, adopted by the internet. The digital investigation into Lyle Stevick was different in character from the one for Grateful Doe. With Grateful Doe, the clues pointed outward to a public subculture, to concert tickets, to a social world. With Lyle, the clues pointed inward. The investigation was forced to focus on the man himself, on the minute details of his physical being. Websleuths spent years, literally years, analyzing the few postmortem photos and the forensic sketch. They debated his ethnicity, with many arguing he had Native American or Hispanic heritage. They noted the specific shape of his earlobes. They discussed the brand of his clothing, a blue plaid shirt, a gray t-shirt underneath. They performed advanced isotopic analysis on samples of his hair and teeth, a fascinating scientific technique that can give clues about the geographical regions where a person has lived and traveled based on the specific isotopic signatures of the water they drank and the food they ate. The results suggested he may have spent significant time in the American Southwest, perhaps in Arizona or New Mexico, or in parts of Western Canada like Alberta or British Columbia. This was a new avenue, but it was still incredibly broad. The community, more than anything, kept his case alive. His sketch was constantly in circulation. Every few months, a new, detailed post about him would appear on Reddit, reaching the front page, introducing his quiet, sad story to a new wave of curious minds. For 16 long years, this digital vigil continued. It was a sustained act of communal remembrance for a man no one actually knew, but whom everyone felt they had a duty to help. And then, in the mid-2010s, a revolutionary new tool emerged in the world of forensic science, a tool that would change the game for cold cases like Lyle's, a tool born directly from the public's interest in their own personal histories. This tool was forensic genetic genealogy. The concept is both breathtakingly simple and brilliantly complex. For years, direct-to-consumer DNA companies like Ancestry.com and 23andMe have allowed people to submit a saliva sample and have it analyzed to discover their ethnic heritage and find potential relatives in the company's database. Many of these users then choose to download their raw DNA data and upload it to public open-source databases like GeneMatch. The goal for these users is to broaden their search, allowing their data to be compared with users from different testing companies to find even more and more distant relatives. Forensic genetic genealogy uses this same public data for law enforcement and identification purposes. A DNA sample from an unidentified person, like Lyle Stevick, can be processed and uploaded to GeneMatch. The system then searches for relatives, people who share significant portions of his DNA. Even finding a third or fourth cousin can be enough to crack a case. By finding a distant relative, highly skilled genealogists can then begin the incredibly painstaking work of building out a family tree, working forwards and backwards in time, through public records like census data, birth certificates, and obituaries, until they can isolate a single candidate who matches the age, location, and physical profile of the unidentified person. This work is incredibly specialized and time-consuming, and it is often done not by government law enforcement agencies, but by nonprofit organizations staffed by brilliant, dedicated volunteer genealogists. One of the first and most prominent of these groups is the DNA Doe Project. In 2018, the DNA Doe Project, funded by small donations from the very online communities that had kept Lyle's case alive for so long, officially took on the case of Lyle Stevick. They obtained a preserved DNA sample from the Grays Harbor County Coroner's Office. They sent it to a specialized lab for a type of whole genome sequencing that would be compatible with the public genealogy databases. And then, the painstaking work of building Lyle's family tree began. They found several matches, all distant cousins. The volunteer genealogists at the DNA Doe Project, working for hundreds of hours of their own free time, began to connect the dots. They built out massive family trees, tracing lineages back to the 19th century. They slowly, methodically narrowed down the possibilities, looking for a specific branch of the family that had a male child, born in the right time frame, who was otherwise unaccounted for in public records. On March 31, 2018, a user on a Lyle Stevick discussion forum on Reddit posted a cryptic, tantalizing message. It simply said, "Guys, I think he might be identified soon. I can't say more." The community buzzed with a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. Had the DNA Doe Project finally found him? A few weeks later, the DNA Doe Project made a quiet, professional announcement. They had made a potential identification and had passed that information on to the authorities at the Grays Harbor County Coroner's Office. The final confirmation had to come from a direct DNA comparison with immediate family members. On May 8, 2018, 16 years, 7 months, and 21 days after he was found in that lonely motel room, the Grays Harbor County Coroner's Office made the official announcement. The man known to the world as Lyle Stevick had been positively identified. His family, from Alameda County, California, had been contacted. They had a son who had left home in 2001, telling them he might be gone for a while, and they had not heard from him since. They, like Jason Callahan's family, had never given up hope that he might one day walk back through the door. They provided their DNA samples, and the match was confirmed. Out of a deep and profound respect for the family's privacy, and because his death was a suicide and not a criminal matter, his true name has never been publicly released. And the online community that worked so hard and for so long to find him has, with near-unanimous grace, honored that wish. He is still, to the public, Lyle Stevick, That is the name of the ghost they knew. But he is no longer a John Doe. He has a family. He has a history. He is no longer a ghost haunting a filing cabinet. He is a memory, mourned and held by those who loved him. The story of Lyle Stevick is a powerful evolution of the Websleuth phenomenon. It shows a perfect partnership between the broad, persistent, awareness-raising efforts of the public online communities and the highly specialized, focused scientific work of a group like the DNA Doe Project. The internet didn't just find a face in a crowd. It funded and facilitated the cutting-edge science that ultimately gave him back his name. So we have two men, Jason Callahan and the man known as Lyle Stevick. Both died young, far from home. Both were lost to the world, their names erased by circumstance and by choice. And both were brought home, in a very real sense, by the tireless work of a global community of strangers, armed with laptops and an unshakable sense of empathy. Their stories represent a fundamental, and I believe hopeful, shift in how we solve the oldest mysteries of the human condition, the mysteries of the unidentified. The lonely detective with the corkboard has been replaced, or at least powerfully augmented, by a global digital collective. The dusty, forgotten file box has been replaced by a shared, living digital space where no one has to be forgotten. This new reality, of course, is not without its own set of significant problems. The world of online web sleuthing can be a messy, and sometimes genuinely harmful pursuit. Misidentifications are common. Well-meaning but overzealous internet detectives have, at times, relentlessly harassed the families of missing persons with incorrect and painful theories. The line between helpful citizen investigation and irresponsible, harmful vigilantism can be dangerously thin. The internet giveth and the internet taketh away. But the stories of Grateful Doe and Lyle Stevick show the immense, undeniable potential for good. They show that at the heart of this strange and fascinating phenomenon is not a desire for glory or a morbid fascination with death, but a profound and deeply human impulse, the desire to give a name back to the nameless. It is a collective, digital refusal to accept that a person can simply be erased from existence. It is a powerful, shared belief that every life has a story, and every story deserves an ending, an author, a name. It is about restoring a small but significant piece of order to a chaotic world, one ghost at a time. These cases are a powerful reminder that the person you might be searching for, or the person who might be searching for you, might be in a decades-old photograph, in a grainy security video, or in a forensic sketch posted on a forum you've never heard of. The crucial clue to solving a generation-spanning mystery might not be in a police file, but locked away in your own memory. You might be the one who recognizes the face in the crowd. The internet has placed the tools of the detective, the power of global communication and vast databases, into the hands of the public. And in doing so, it has given us all the ability to light a candle at that digital campfire, to help keep a cold case warm with our attention, and to, perhaps finally and definitively, guide a lost soul home. If these stories of connection, of mystery, and of resolution have moved you, I encourage you to explore the resources available online. Websites like the Doe Network and the Nameless database are filled with the faces and stories of thousands of other unidentified individuals who are still waiting for their names. Perhaps you will see a face you recognize from your past. Perhaps you hold a small piece of a puzzle you never knew existed. And if you are interested in the incredible scientific side of this work, consider looking into the DNA Doe Project and other similar nonprofit organizations. They are doing incredible, life-changing work, often funded entirely by small donations from people just like you. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Please subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the mysteries that lie at the fascinating intersection of the past and the present. And please share your thoughts in the comments below. What do these stories mean to you? What is the future of solving cold cases in our hyper-connected, and yet often isolating world. The conversation continues, and every voice, every memory, adds another piece to the puzzle.